rather punctual with our time. So let's. Oh, that's funny. So anyway, Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, present in all places, including all things, come and dwell in us, come to be faith and save our souls, O gracious Lord.
Amen.
All right. So let us. There we go. All right. So we are going to first. I'm going to turn my phone down and open up the questions that were asked of me last week. So the first question that was asked by Helen Choros was, can you explain Thessalonians chapter 4, 15 through 18? And so what that is from the epistle that is read at funeral services. And so let me pull that up. All right. Okay. According to the Lord's word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. The Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, with the trumpet of call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. Now, what does that mean exactly? That means that when the second coming comes, that when the general judgment of the world is to take place, that the order of which we will be judged is kind of the order in which we died. So those that died first get judged first, and we who are alive get judged next. And so what this is basically saying is that when Christ comes, it will be with the archangel's command, the voice of the trumpet. It'll be a big, obvious image. So we will not be unknown as when Christ came the first time. This is very important because pull this down because it's overloading the visual. When Christ comes the second time, it will be the end, and so it's very, very important that we understand that when Christ comes the second time, that it will be unambiguous, that when he's coming, it is the final judgment. So I hope that answers Helen's question.
Well, I have one question on that. When you die, I mean, I thought you were judged when you die.
Well, so what we're looking at here, and this is what and this may have been what she was getting at. What we're looking at is that when we die, there are the general judgment and the particular judgment. So when we die, the first thing that happens is the particular judgment, which basically says, where are you going to end up? And we have to understand that where you end up is not like purgatory. So we don't have this concept of, you're in kind of a zone in between worlds. No, what you experience is what is known as the foretaste. So what happens is that if you are going to experience the foretaste of hell, you were sent to hell. If you're going to experience the foretaste of heaven, you were sent to heaven. But it is not the complete. It is not the complete experience of that. For those that are in hell, the pilot light has not been turned on. For those in heaven, the actual banquet has not begun. So to kind of explain it in ways that people can understand, because Jesus Christ uses the example of the wedding feast often when comparing heaven, is that the very first part of the wedding feast is what?
Hors d'oeuvres.
Hors d'oeuvres, or cocktail hour. And so basically, everyone that's in heaven right now is experiencing the cocktail hour, the hors d'oeuvres section. It's great. It's fun. We're seeing all of our loved ones. We're mingling. But the gates haven't opened yet to experience the fullness of heaven. By the same token, those that are in hell have not experienced yet the fullness of the judgment of hell when the fire consumes all things. And this is another reason why it is possible for us to pray for those that are in hell, because it is possible through our prayers to hopefully alleviate some of their suffering, or for those that are kind of on the cusp to maybe evoke some change that they might be able to be saved. But it does mean that this is separate from the general judgment, in which case, basically, that's when everything is finalized and okay, it's done. Does that make sense?
Yes, Father. And also the part where you're supposedly coming up in the clouds. Are we literally going up in the clouds? What is that thing called that you hear sometimes?
The rapture.
The rapture.
No, because the rapture is this idea that somehow we'll all be judged, and those that are going to heaven right now, and then those that were not good enough for heaven are going to stay on earth. That is not part of our belief structure. They take that from the concept of in Matthew, when Jesus Christ is talking about, it would be better for you not to be pregnant in those times. What he's actually referring to is not the sudden judgment. This is a problem because people look at that and they understand it as the final judgment. But what he's talking about is when Rome is coming upon Jerusalem. At that moment where it's going to be desolation, and one is going to be taken and one is not going to be taken, and there will be a lot of death. It's going to be a very trying time. But when we're looking at the general resurrection and being brought up into the clouds, it's the idea of the new creation, that we will be united with God, that our souls will all be together at once. And those that have died, that, it won't be, in spirit, it'll be physical. This is one of the reasons why we don't cremate people. We bury them, because the idea is that when this time comes, their bodies will rise and they will be given their souls back, and they will go to the front of the line.
Okay.
So that was the first question. The second question is, what is the hardest part of being a priest, and how can we help our priests? That's kind of a cheeky one from my spiritual son. The hardest part of being a priest is sometimes recognizing your limitations. You want to help everyone, you want to love everyone, and you have to recognize that it's not you. You are not the one that is actually helping. You are not the one that is able to do anything for anybody. And so sometimes when you see somebody fall and you wish you could have done more to help that person, that's a hard part. The other hard part about being a priest is, of course, experiencing everyone's grief. There's a reason why priests wear black. They're in mourning for the world. And so more often than not, a priest is with people in the hardest times of their lives. And so what you are doing is you are basically a shoulder to cry on for them in those hardest times of their life. Often during those times, it's not even about what the priest is going to say. It's just a matter of being physically there for the person when they're dealing with these dire situations. One of the ways that we can help our priest: pray for your priest. The priest's primary function is to pray for you. His most important prayers are those that are done in front of the proskyme Dei. That's why we give our names to the priest during services. But your priest needs prayers too. This was true of Jesus Christ. It's true of us. Strike the shepherd, the sheep will scatter. So the priest deals with more temptation and more spiritual combat than the average lay person. Because if the priest deals with, if the priest falls, if the priest causes scandal, if the priest harms somebody, then it's not just going to affect that one person, it's going to affect everybody. And so it's very, very important that we pray for our priests not to fall, because they're the ones leading us. They're the ones trying to be the example to us. And what's important about this example to understand is because the priest is not actually the shepherd. Jesus Christ is the shepherd. The bishop who represents Christ is also considered the shepherd. That's why the bishop carries the bishop's staff, which is the shepherd's crook. The priest does not carry that. The priest is not the bishop. But the priest is like that sheep. If you've ever been to a farm, there's always a sheep with a bell around its neck. And that's kind of the lead sheep. And so when the shepherd is calling, the shepherd is usually looking directly at that sheep, the sheep that has the bell around its neck. And that sheep goes, okay, I'm going. And all the other sheep know to follow that sheep. And so this is one of the reasons why we ask ourselves, which direction does the priest face the majority of the liturgy? He's facing the same direction as the people. So he's praying with the people, for the people, not at the people. And every time the priest turns around to bless or to do an action, what does the priest do? He blesses with this sign, Jesus Christos Nika, Jesus Christ, showing us that Christ is the one doing the blessing. So that is the answer to that question. I hope that answers your question, John, of how we can help our priests. Obviously, pray for them, volunteer for them, because oftentimes what happens is someone will come to a priest and they'll say, Father, I've got an idea for a ministry. That's great. It's like, are you ready to lead this ministry? No, that's for you to do. I can't do that. If you've got an idea for a ministry, be prepared to help us do it. Roll up your sleeves, let's get into it, because your ideas are always going to be the best. All right. The next question that was sent online is, are we, one second. Are we doomed if we are no longer passionate about strict fasting, asking for a friend? So we have to ask ourselves, what is the point of fasting? Why do we fast? And why is there strict fasting? And we have to understand that fasting is not an end unto itself. Fasting is a tool in our arsenal. It's an arrow in our quiver that's trying to help us get to our destination. So fasting is not the end unto itself. So the question is, when we fast, there's two aspects of it. One, of course, is we're humbling ourselves. We are lowering ourselves so that we are not doing exactly what we would always want to do, eat whatever we want. So, of course, there's that offering unto God. But the second aspect of it is that when we fast, by not eating as much, by being aware of what we're eating, it allows us to be more focused on what we are doing. An example that I like to use is a boxer or a basketball player. What would happen to that individual if they ate a giant plate of spaghetti before a game or a match? What would happen to that individual?
He'd probably throw up.
Yeah, he'd throw up. He'd be, sluggish. And especially if you're boxing, and this is more apropos for us in spiritual warfare, is that if you're boxing and you're sluggish, what's going to happen to you?
You're being knocked out.
You're going to get knocked out. You're going to get knocked down because you're not able to think. They've done, scientific studies on this that basically show that your brain synapses fire faster when you're a little bit hungry. And so why is that important? Is because during these times of fasting, we're supposed to be praying. We're supposed to be focusing on our spiritual warfare because we are preparing ourselves for a great feast, whether it's for Christmas, whether it's for Pascha, whether it's for Panagia, whether it's for the apostles. And so the idea is to be prepared. The other aspect of it is to understand why we fast on a normal week. So on Wednesday, we fast because we are cognizant of the betrayal of Christ, that Judas betrayed Christ on Wednesday. And then on Friday, we are cognizant of the fact that Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sins. And so these are very heavy, heavy, heavy important days. And likewise, at certain feast days, such as the Feast of the Holy Cross, obviously that's a strict fast day. The beheading of St. John the Baptist, obviously a very strict fast day. Now, strict fasting can mean a great many things. Now, obviously, we look into the root of the canons. It means no wine, no dairy, no meat. You try to subside on vegetables, legumes, or shrimps, or things like that. Now, the problem with that is that if we take that to one level, you say, okay, fine, then I'll eat tons and tons of shrimp, I'll eat tons and tons of lobster, because that's technically a shellfish, and suddenly you're eating like a very rich diet that is very contrary to the concept of fasting. And so we have to always look back to the spirit of fasting. Why am I fasting? Am I fasting just for the letter of the law to say, okay, margarine versus butter, so that's okay because it's not exactly butter? You have to ask yourself, what am I doing? And the other aspect of it too is, although there are general rules for fasting, by and large, you should be going to your priest for particulars about your fasting journey. In the same way that there are general understandings about our diet, but if you want to get a personal diet that is going to help you specifically, you go to a dietitian. You talk to your doctor. You say, this is what's going to work for me. Everybody's body is different. And, in the same thing, everyone's spiritual journey is different. If you came from a tradition that had no fasting whatsoever, and then suddenly you're immersed in this, your first temptation is going to be, I'm going to do all of it. I'm going to fast as strictly as I possibly can. And invariably, in 2 or 3 days, when you fail, how are you going to feel?
Terrible.
You're going to feel horrible. You're going to feel like you're a failure. And so it's better to be with a spiritual father, guiding you along the way, making marks on you to say, okay, this was a little hard. Let's scale it back. This was too easy. Let's scale it forward. So that we are able to accomplish the goal of fasting. Because fasting, like I said, is not the end unto itself. By that same token, there are people that have to take medication. And they will, argue with people blue in face. They'll say, no, I can't eat anything. So therefore, I'm going to go to church without taking my medicine. And they pass out on the solea. And that's not good. And so many times priests, and again, you must consult with your spiritual father before this, will say, eat what you need to eat, take your medicine so that you can be healthy and come to church. Because again, fasting isn't the end. One of the reasons why we fast before we go to receive communion is to understand that the body is the temple. You want it swept, you want it empty, you want it prepared so that when the sacrifice, communion comes in, it's the only thing there. Now keep in mind, sometimes you have to have necessary things in the temple because of necessity. If you're going to die, if you're not going to be able to take this medication, or it's going to affect you in a terrible way, you really need to take that medication. Now, I'm not saying have steak and eggs, but take what you need to take so that you can take the medicine and come to church and understand that it's katikonomia, that it is not just a given, it's an allowance because this is necessary. So I hope that answered Gia's question. All right, so now that we've answered all of our online questions.
I do have a question. Now, the question was, am I doomed? In other words, if I was fast, but I try to fast, but maybe it's not like the strict fast. I do what I can. I mean, does that do me or because, I understand why we fast, because our attention should be on Christ, rather than on the amazing steak, let's say, or something. So you don't have steak, you have something else, but, if we in our mind are thinking, okay, I'm doing this much, and my mind is on Christ, does that doom us that we didn't have a more strict fast?
Well, we have to understand a couple of elements here. First of all, and again, I will always refer back to saying, specifically with your priest, make your decision. You do not make this decision on your own to say, okay, well, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. That being said, we also have to look at the history of the world and understand that at the time when these fasting rules were implemented, it was a different dietary structure. Meat, for example, something that is in every single one of our American diets, that is part, what most people eat daily, was not something that was a daily edible for people in the time of Christ and, for a couple hundred years after. When would you eat meat? At
Probably
parties.
a celebration back then.
Yeah, it would be celebrations. The idea that you would not kill something unless you had to. So basically, you wouldn't kill a bull. You wouldn't kill a lamb unless it was necessary because you needed that lamb for other things. So you would only do it for a party, for a big celebration. So when we're saying don't eat meat, what was the real impetus behind saying don't eat meat?
That we're
Don't
not
party.
celebrating.
Don't party.
No part. Yeah. Okay.
Don't have a grand old time. So again, to me, it's less about the nitty gritty, the minutia of each of the fasting details. For example, we look at olive oil versus olives. Why were we not allowed to have olive oil? Because it was stored in the sacks of animal skins. which was
Yeah, yeah.
part of the don't be with anything that has to do with animals. Um, why are we allowed to have vegetable oil as opposed to olive oil? Again, when we start looking at the minutiae, we start to lose the point.
Okay, I
Now,
understand.
there is an element of the point, which is to say, humble yourself, be obedient. That in and of itself is a virtue. When we humble ourselves, that's a very important thing. But again, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. 1 second.
Hey, Daisy.
All right. All right. So does anybody have any other questions that we'd like to address on our second of three Ask Fathers?
Hi, Father. It's Nick. How are you?
Hi, Nick.
I had a question about cremation. You hear more and more about cremation these days. Why don't we allow that? And so I thought I'd ask you a little bit about that.
Okay, so that's a very good question because it's becoming very, very popular. And a lot of our Catholic friends have gotten annoyed with this because, prior to about 20 years ago, in the Catholic Church, they were basically being told that if you cremate your loved one, both they and you are going to hell. And so when they kind of did a reversal on that about a decade ago, a lot of Catholics were like, wait a second, you told us that if we did this, this was going to be a big problem. Now suddenly it's okay. What changed? For us, it has never changed. And the reason why it has not changed is because the reality is that you burn bodies for two reasons. The first and foremost is garbage. You burn garbage. So, for example, you've heard of dumpster fires, you've heard of um, landfills on fire. And so, if you look at Gehenna, and when I say the word Gehenna, what does your mind immediately think of?
Garbage pit outside of Jerusalem.
Oh, you hush, you already knew the answer.
Yeah. I know it's somewhere. Thank you.
But whenever you hear about Gehenna, you always think of the flames of Gehenna, because Gehenna is always used as an allegory for hell. But what was Gehenna really? Gehenna was an area outside of Jerusalem where everything was on fire. It was the garbage pits. In fact, it was there that they, dug down to find the cross of Christ. So it's basically you burn garbage. The human body is not garbage. The other reason why you would burn something is sacrifice. You burn sacrifices. The whole burnt offerings. You burn the lambs. You burn the turtle doves. Well, as Christians, we understand that the last sacrifice was Christ Himself. That's why the curtain of the temple split in two, because there are no more sacrifices. There are no more blood sacrifices, and so you are not a sacrifice. So, as such, your body, which is precious, remember it was purchased with a cost, as St. Paul says, is so precious that you cannot burn it, you cannot throw it away, you cannot disparage that body, because that body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. And as such, when the second coming comes, your spirit will be reunited with your body. Second of all, and perhaps more apropos to our experience of God, is the miracles of the relics of the saints. I mean, for goodness sakes, we have a tooth of Saint Andrew in our church, and that is a miraculous relic. I've seen miracles happen just from the follicles of hair from a saint. When we try to burn up the body, we lose the sanctity of what the body is as part of who you are, because we are three pieces: spirit, soul, and body. All three of them are important. All three of them are critical, and so therefore you cannot just toss one away or say, "Oh, okay, I'm going to burn it." Now, one will say, "Well, what if somebody dies in a forest fire? What if somebody dies on a house fire?" Well, we have to recognize again, and this is important when we look to the Universal Letter of St. John, Intent. What was your intention? Of course, God can reconstitute you from an atom. So if you were vaporized in a nuclear blast, you don't think God can bring you back? Of course he can. That's not the point. It's the intention. Why did you do it? By that same token, if somebody, a loved one, because I get this a lot where people are upset with relatives that decide to cremate their loved one, and they're like, that was never their intention. They never would have wanted that. What's going to happen to my loved one? I was like, your loved one didn't intend that. Your loved one didn't ask for that. You think God's going to hold your loved one accountable for that? No.
Interesting.
Oh, well, thank you. That's interesting because, like we say, we're hearing more and more of it. I mean, on a cost basis, other basis, expediency, other whatever people are
and that's the thing too.
thinking.
People say it's like, oh, it's better for the environment. So the last I checked, burning bodies is not good for the environment.
Yeah, not so good. Not so good.
And second thing, they talk about how it's peaceful, it's nice, it's in a fire. But have you ever watched a cremation process?
Nope.
I just think of the old James Bond movie where he was alive and they tried to burn him up. It didn't look good.
Let's put it this way: your bones, they don't burn that easily, especially some of your bigger bones, like your shin bone. And so after the fire does most of it, they have to go in with a hammer and smash some of the bigger pieces. So this isn't exactly just oh wow, it's so nice that everything burns and then it all is there and that's all your body. Here's the thing too, it's like some of that stuff is residual. So when in that urn is not necessarily all your loved one, it could be other things as well.
Oh God.
So speaking of bones, so what happens at the monasteries though, right? Where they're where you see the rooms full of skulls or things. So what do they bury the bodies and then unearth them and
so what happens in monasteries, and this is very interesting, especially in the monastery of Saint Saba, the Sanctified in Palestinian desert, they will bury the body in a mausoleum, and then they will check on the body every 3 years, because it typically takes inside a mausoleum about 6 to 7 years for a body to fully skeletalize, to be fully destroyed. What's really creepy, if you've seen pictures from like World War I, where bodies were left out in the open, they could be skeletal within a week, just from the elements. But obviously, what happens during that period is a very gross period. It's putrefaction, bloating, gases, nasty stuff. So oftentimes, when you pass certain areas like that, you'll smell the stench of death. What's interesting about the mausoleum at Saint Saba's Monastery is that it smells like wax. Like even as the bodies are decomposing, it doesn't stink. It's right under the courtyard, and they take one of the flagstones off and they move it off. But the stench of death goes straight through everything. So I mean, you can't get away from that. But what happens is that they will look at the body after 3 years and see kind of where it's at in its decomposition position. See if they have to like move the body a little bit. But sometimes what happens during that period is they will find an incorrupt body. So, for example, Saint Nectarios, when everyone that quote unquote knew him thought that he was an evil person. So when his body was incorrupt, the local bishop said, "Oh, it's incorrupt because he's a sinner, and God is not going to allow his body to decompose." That's when he threw the body into the Aegean Sea, and when it washed up like this and was still perfectly incorrupt, he's like, "Oh, wait a second." But that's one of the things that's very sad about our lifestyle here in America, because we have a very big kind of set it and forget it kind of attitude towards our loved ones. We just throw them in the ground and just never think of them again. I mean, there's a reason why we're supposed to have memorials, go to the grave. It's not that the person is spiritually there, it's their body, but then their soul is everywhere. Their soul is, in paradise. The soul is comforting those that are in need. But we honor the body because it is the receptacle of the Holy Spirit. As the soul, as the keeper of the soul, it is going to be reunited with the body in the final judgment. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I just guess I don't know where I saw a picture where they had a skull and they looked like there was writing on top of the skull, and then they had a whole room full of skulls.
Correct. So what they do there is like after the after the decomposition part takes place. Because what happens in Greece typically is you can fit the entire body into a box about yay big. Because after you take, basically, once you've got the skull, the rib bones, all that stuff, it just kind of neatly kind of needs together. It can fit into a nice little box. So what they will typically do is they'll take all of the bones below the neck, just kind of put them all in a big pile, because they're still there, they're still present, and they'll take the skull and they'll write on it with honor and with love, and they'll put that on a shelf with all of the other monastics, and they'll write the person's name there. And so what will sometimes happen is for the keeper, that is basically whose job it is to take care of that room, is they will come in and they will venerate each skull, showing honor for those that have passed.
Wow. And then they know who it was.
Exactly. So, for example, there was a saint in Vatopedi who decided to hide his body. He knew he was going to die. He was a saint, but he was kind of a hidden saint. So he hid his body inside that stack of bones. And so what happened was, years later, like 100 years later, they had to move the bones to like another side of the room because they were cleaning for something, and they found the entire skeleton, bent over in prayer underneath. And so they had no idea who this guy was, because they thought, oh, maybe this saint had, maybe this person had run away. They figured, no, there's all kinds of reasons why someone would disappear from the monastery. And so there was no record. They didn't know, who is this guy. And so they started calling him Evdokimos. Dokimos meaning the good trainer, and Ev meaning good. And so for years they saw that these bones were smelling of myrrh, and that was one of the reasons why they found it, because there was a sweet smell coming from the bones. And that's something that we see oftentimes with the saints, is that God will reveal the saints not immediately but after. Saint Phonurios, for example, who was not found for hundreds of years after. Saint Nicholas, Raphael, and Irene on the island of Rhodes were not found until centuries after the fact. So oftentimes God reveals his saints much later, and so no one had any idea who this saint was. And then one day the abbot had a dream, because he said, I want to know who this person is. And so he was brought in front of St. Paul and St. John Chrysostom. St. John Chrysostom's relics are also in that monastery. And they said, you've asked, so we'll tell you. This is the name of this saintly monk. And the monk said, yes, that is my name. That was what the name I was tonsured with. But don't tell anybody that. I like the name of Evdokimos. Keep that. And so Saint Evdokimos is his relics are taught whenever they bring out the relics, the main treasury relics of Vatopedi, which include the skull of St. John Chrysostom. They'll bring out St. Evdokimos' skull as well. So that's what they do with the relics.
Have you been there too? Did you go to Mount Athos?
It's something else when you look at the skull of St. John Chrysostom and you see that his ear is still intact.
Really?
Yeah.
And do they classify the relics? Isn't there some type of like minor, major, or some different classification?
There's first class, second class, third class relics. And what it basically is distinguished is, a first class relic is a relic that is basically the body part. So for example, the skull that we have is, the tooth of St. Andrew, that's considered a first class relic. It's part of his body. A second class relic is something that was part of the saint. So for example, the chains of St. Peter would be considered a second class relic, because they touched him. The clothing that was on it. So for example, the slippers of St. Gerasimos of Kepania, or St. Dionysius, that's considered a second class relic because it touched the saint. A third class relic is a relic that has touched something of the saint and also has miraculous properties. So for example, those belts that people give to ladies, what those were belts that were placed on top of the belt of the Panagia, prayed over, and then given to the person. So that's considered a third class relic because it is still a worker of miracles. The apples of Saint Irene Crisvolandu that many people consume for miracles, that is considered a third class relic because while it's not her body part, it's not something that she directly touched, but because it is part of the apple orchard that came from her apple, it is considered part of her. So it is considered a third class relic. So that's the three classes of relics.
Okay, thank you. Solved the mystery for me there.
And I learned something because I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's why I love these Ask Father sessions, because oftentimes you'll get a question of something that's like, I never even thought to ask that.
Cool.
Anybody else?
I did have one more question. If you can
I do.
put up with another one. You told me about this when we were picking up our new friend, the iconographer from the hotel the other day. We were talking about the Righteous Melchizedek.
Yes.
And I was trying to think about what you told me, and I couldn't remember at all. So I need a refresher on Melchizedek from Salem.
So Melchizedek is a character that appeared in Genesis when Abraham's nephew Lot was captured by various tribes. And so Abraham and his families, they gathered together with all of the other tribes to basically go and rescue Lot. So there was this big battle, this big war. And one of the primary kings that was present was Melchizedek, the king of Salem. And obviously there is no map of Salem, and this is the only mention of Salem. And after the battle was over, Abraham said that we need to give tithe of everything that came from the battle to Melchizedek. This is the origin of tithing, of the 10% rule, of giving 10% to God. So it started from Abraham, obviously our father in faith. And what is interesting is that when Melchizedek was blessing and prophesying for Abraham, he sat him down on Mount Carmel, which eventually becomes Mount Sinai, if I'm not mistaken. It's Mount Tabor. Excuse me. So it's the mountain of Transfiguration, because it's obviously it's very significant that this moment happened there, because obviously with the Transfiguration it also happens there. Now, what did Melchizedek do? He took wine and bread and blessed it and gave it to Abraham. Now, what exactly is that?
Communion.
Communion. So the very first Eucharist was given by Melchizedek to Abraham. Now,
and that's why he goes on the right side and the
correct. But it gets more interesting.
Right.
So this is why it's very, very important. Why you keep hearing about the priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, because it was shown that Melchizedek was a high priest. Well, his priesthood, obviously, he's to the Most High God. We know that. But what's interesting about him is that he supplies three personal attributes that really no one else has. We've had a lot of prophets. We've had a lot of priests. We've had a lot of kings. We've had some that are both prophets and kings, such as King David. We've had priests who are also prophets. But we've never had a king, a prophet, and a priest all in the same person, except for Melchizedek and one other person. And who is that person?
Christ.
Christ.
And the king of Salem. Well, Shalom, what is Salem?
Peace.
Peace.
Nicely done, Nick. The king of peace. And that is, of course, paradise. Jerusalem, the city of peace. So the king of peace is Jesus Christ. So this is in an instance when Jesus Christ came physically in the Old Testament and revealed himself to mankind. And his priesthood, of course, is forever. This is why we show an icon of the high priest, Jesus Christ, which is the Melchizedek, on the bishop's throne, because the bishop is the physical stand-in for this. Jesus Christ, our high priest. And so the icon of Melchizedek inside the altar represents this as the high priesthood of Jesus Christ.
Oh, thank you for I might have to go have a few more refreshers as I go through all that and read a little bit more. But it's interesting, right? Through something that happened, right? We had destroyed icons that, we're talking about this, and I'm learning something, and everybody is too. Even with the icon of the Nativity as well. That I really, I looked at it and focused solely on the central theme of it, but not realizing all those other elements that are going on in a seemingly simple scene, but it really isn't when I look at it.
Exactly right. It's not simple at all.
No.
Anybody else have a question?
Yes, Father, I have one. I have a lot of, most of my icons are not necessarily put behind the altar for 40 days. So if my icon is not, behind the altar for 40 days, I pray to my icons. Is it critical that they need to be there for 40 days? I never heard of that.
We have to not lose ourselves in the minutia of these things. Why is it placed behind the altar for 40 days?
I guess to be blessed.
It is blessed, but why is it blessed?
On the 40 days it rose.
Because it is a gift. It is an item that is placed basically in the altar, in the place where the prayers are happening, where the communion is taking place, where the Holy Spirit is being called down, where the entire community is praying together. And so basically what that is imbuing that object with the idea of the faith, the prayers of not just you and your household, but the entire church, the entire body of faith. And so we bring it back there so that it is understood that this item is not just mine. It is not just for me. It is part of everyone. It is part of the church. And that the saint that is represented there is praying within the church as well. Because remember that an icon is a window into the reality that is presented. That we are kissing not the wood or the paint, we are kissing the foot of the person depicted. And so, it's not a matter of the action itself to say, okay, I clicked off my brownie point. It's asking, why am I doing? Why am I bringing it to the church? Why is it important for me to have it blessed for 40 days? So that it is imbued with the prayers of all these people. And so that it is considered something sacred. We could do that same action to say, okay, well, why do I need to go to marriage? Why do I need to get married in the church? Can't I just say, may you be blessed? And so we bring it to the church so that it is imbued with prayers to basically say, God, I'm asking you to bless this. I'm coming to your house to put this in my house or to put it in someone else's house to say, God, I want you to bless this.
So then what about all my icons I haven't brought to the church? Do I need to gather them all up? I
gotta bring you a crate. I said too.
It'd be nice if you could, but there's also, we have to understand that some icons, are pre-sold rather like that, like some monastery icons, before they even put them on the bookshelf, they'll have been, in the altar for 40 days to basically prior to that. And, because some of the people don't realize it. And then also we have to understand too, again, kind of like when we're talking about cremation, it's intention. If you didn't realize and you say, oh no, is God going to hold you accountable? Is the saint going to say, well, you didn't put my icon back there, so I'm not gonna intercede for you.
Not even going to hear you. You're praying to me, but
get out.
Anybody else?
I have a question. Hi, Father.
Hi, Maria.
Hi. My mom, I still have with her, who had gone to monasteries, and I have a bunch of little bottles of holy water, oil. I can't tell her Greek writing. Yadas have done that, our mothers have done that. Of course, I've saved all these things because I don't know what to do with them. Obviously, she had taught me that if you have to dispose of anything, you dispose it into the earth, not in the garbage can or in the sink.
Correct.
Whatever. Right. So in one place I was thinking, well, maybe I should consolidate a drop or two in one big bottle. Maybe I should just give them away. Maybe the church has a better way. So I want to be respectful of these. I want to, save some for myself, but I'm talking about 30, 40 bottles, some from monasteries, from Jerusalem, from some friends. And then I have like flowers, and bracelets and, so I know that we have people who are missionaries who could use those, but they're old, they're past 10 years old. what's the best way to honor these things and or to use them, or do I keep them for myself in a little box?
So one of the things that we have to try to avoid is just creating keepsakes for the sake of keepsakes.
To do what?
To get keepsakes for the sake of keepsakes.
Right,
Because what some people do is they'll just have like a box somewhere in their house of just full of stuff. Other people had these in their proskytitarion, and when they look at these oils and these waters, they'll remember the holy places that they went, whether it was water from the River Jordan when they went to the River Jordan, holy oil from the candles of the various monasteries that they visited that were burning over the relics of various saints. Obviously each of these things are important. And so for someone like your mom that was obviously very in tune with what she was doing, she was probably thinking like, okay, this saint, you prayed your intercessions for this. So I would anoint somebody with this oil if they're having this malady. Various priests, for example, will have different oils from different saints that they've visited because they want to have that saint intercede for that individual. And, a lot of priests will have oil from Saint Nectarios or oil from St. John of Shanghai.
That's what we have.
And so what you would basically have the ability is that when you're feeling sick or feeling upset, you would call a priest, or, if you can't get a hold of a priest, anoint yourself with it, put a sign of the cross. There are several people that for those, but it's not the great holy water, not the holy water from Theophany, but the whole regular holy water that you get at different places where they might drink a little bit of it every day as part of their daily prayer routine. So what's important is to make sure that these items don't just become keepsakes, like a signed baseball or basketball. That is, it's there on the shelf, but it needs to be something that is used. If it's not an article of prayer, then it's not being used properly. And so, Maria, your idea of saying, looking for someone to say, okay, is this something that you would use? To ask different priests to say, do you have need of this in your hospital kit? Would you like oil from this saint? Would you like oil from this place for this? Obviously, for disposal of things, we, as you said, you could pour them in places where no one will step. That's very, very important. Some people will put them in potted plants, the eastern wall of a church. Just making sure it's in a place that no one is going to actually step on it.
Yeah, so if I have bottles that I don't know where they're coming from monasteries, I mean, I can't tell her writing. It's just in a little bottle with a cross in it. It's not as specific as St. Nectarios. Is that something the church would want? Or do I bring it to you? Do I make my best decision as to what I can understand and discern, and the rest, like I said, dispose of in a sacred place or near a church?
That's what I would do.
For myself.
I would discern it for yourself to say, okay, what is this item? And if it's not, if you don't know what it is, then obviously do a supplicatory prayer service to the Mother of God as you basically take these items to dispose of in a prayerful manner. Obviously back in the day, people knew what they had. So when you put a cross, like, I know what that is, but it's hard for the next generation to decipher and say, okay, I don't know what this is.
Yeah, I don't know. And I don't know if she got them as gifts, or I don't think she got them herself. Most of them were from gifts and people who brought them from Jerusalem as they were coming from trips.
Right.
Okay, that's helpful. That's helpful. Thank you, Father.
And if they're holy oils, like I said, those are things that you could ask your priest. You could ask Father Rick if he needs anything for his hospital kits. Some priests like having an arsenal that they bring to anoint people. Some priests like having an arsenal of different oils to anoint people.
An arsenal. Okay.
Father, in the same vein, I mean, we get palms on Palm Sunday, and then they start collecting. What I've ended up doing, I mean, do you burn them, or is it okay to sort of bury them in the garden? Because I buried them in the garden thinking like, well, I don't know.
So again, I think we do burn some items, and again, we don't consider it trash, but we do take those ashes because there's a difference between burning palms or burning old paper icons or burning the cotton balls or burning items that are no longer able to be used and disposing them, like Marie was saying, in a place where no one will step. there's a difference between burning an object versus burning a body.
We still have our burn pile, I think, growing. They're going to see it from the space station when we have all those things burned. We've been collecting for a while. We found a whole pile of things to burn.
But again, like Marie was saying, you do it in a respectful manner. You do it in a prayerful manner. I remember burning the carpet at St. Nectarius when we had spilled communion, and we had roped it off so that no one would step on it. When weeks later, when we finally got permission to burn the carpet, I remember cutting out the carpet, and it had been weeks, and underneath the carpet was this droplet, which looked like, when you cut your finger and a piece of blood like hits the ground. That's what was sitting there, waiting there. And I wiped it up, and the napkin became crimson as if I'd wiped like fresh blood. And I brought that with me to the bonfire pit of St. Nectarius when we burned the carpet with that, because obviously it was sacred. It's very, very important.
Wow.
Does anyone have any other final questions with our last 10 minutes?
Well, sort of a silly question. I know we're not supposed to anoint our dogs with holy oil or something. Can we give them holy water? And like I have the old holy water, and I thought, well, not that it's not fresh, but I thought, well, I got my new holy water. Maybe I should dispose of the other holy water. But I was wondering, can I give it to my dog, or it's best to put it outside?
So the holy water of theophany, because I imagine that's the water that you received on January 5th, that is considered extremely sacred, important, sacramental almost. You don't take that water unless it's not the same as just the regular water that you would get, once a month from the church, or when you go to a monastery. That holy water for theophany is supposed to be used only after a period of fasting and prayer, like before a major surgery. It should only be, other than that, it should only be consumed on the 5th or the 6th. So the old holy water that you used should be disposed of, and no, not to your dog.
I consider her holy, but okay, that's what I think. I was thinking I shouldn't do that. That maybe I should just put it where the plants are, where no one steps, and help that and do that. Okay.
Correct. Because again, we have to remember that and this happens to a lot of us. We end up collecting a collection of like 30 bottles from different theophany years,
year after year.
And these are supposed to be articles of prayer. I mean, it's supposed to be, to me, it's kind of like, when you have medicine in a cabinet that is past the expiration date. Not that holiness expires, but the idea is that, this is something that's important. We should treat it as important. Understand that bottle of holy water is absolutely sacred because it is from the Feast of Theophany. There is other lesser blessings of waters that we do throughout the year, and those are the waters that we would use as part of our daily prayer routine.
Okay.
But yes, like when I'm doing house blessings, I will splash the dogs, what have you. But no, there's a difference between like putting it in the dog's water dish or something like that. No. When we're using things that are of the lesser quality, because again, there are ranks of the items that we're using. So, for example, holy chrism versus holy oil. Obviously, there's a difference. One's a sacrament. One is something that is a blessing, where you can bless. So, for example, people have given holy oil to the non-Orthodox, and they've seen miracles happen. That's a little different than the idea of evangelion, which is a sacrament that only a priest could administer.
Okay, now I know. Yeah, did you have a question? No? Okay.
All right, we have time for one more question. Let me do a quick peek online to see if we have anybody that's asked a question. Okay, don't see any comments. We'll answer them next week. All right. Well, if there are no more questions for this week, I hope everyone has a blessed and wonderful week. As we discussed last week, we will be discussing Christology by St. Nectarius. So if you haven't already and you intend to be part of that class, please order it so that you can begin reading it in preparation for our Blessed Darkness that will start February 22nd. Next week will be our last Ask Father session. So please be prepared with a set of questions that you'd like answered. And I hope everyone has a blessed and wonderful night. God bless you all. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, present in all places and filling all things, come and dwell in us. Come to sustain and save our souls, gracious Lord.
I
All
mean,
right, everybody, take care.
Bye-bye.
Father.